Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and
Hello.
together we are ThinkerThemer. I review games from a mechanics perspective, and Maggie is all about the theme. And today we have a Gen Con release, which is Middle Ages by Studio H. But why do we have this other game here? Because this game is actually a remake of Majesty For the Realm, and both games are designed by Marc-Andre, who is the designer of Splendor, but it was originally published by Z-Man Games, and it's kind of gone out of print. So Middle Ages is a remake of this game, which has slightly different rules and completely different art. So we're going to compare the pair, but we'll start by telling you a little bit about Middle Ages because that's the new game and most people wouldn't know that much about it.
So in both Middle Ages and Majesty for the Realm, the theme is that we are lords of a fiefdom, which we're going to be developing by constructing different areas. So you might decide to have a fiefdom that is all about agriculture, or more around commerce, or a very aggressive, more of a fighting army, or big defense. So whoever ends up creating the best possible fiefdom will be the winner.
Now your fiefdom consists of this player board, which is going to be where you're going to build out your tableau, which becomes an engine builder throughout the game, because the more tiles you've placed here of a particular type, the more rewards that you're going to be collecting throughout the game. Now players will be drafting these tiles from this central area by using their little character that's sitting on the horse here, the Lord, and they're going to be placing this character on the tile that they want to collect. Now this is an interesting choice because the leftmost tile that someone selects is going to play out before the rightmost tile. So we're going to play that out and it's going to dictate the turn order. So do you want to grab something that you really want on the right hand side of the draft, but then know that you're not going to be able to play it until last? And then importantly, once you've selected that tile and placed it into your fiefdom, you're also going to then have next pick of the next line of tiles. So if you go earlier in the turn order in one row, you're going to have first pick of the tile in the next row. Now when you do take a tile, it triggers a number of things. Firstly, it triggers a unique action for that type of tile. So for example, imagine I drafted this windmill. It slots in here beautifully into this player board that has unique cutouts for each type of tile. This slots in here, and then the action that's triggered is for everybody who has fewer windmills than I do in their fiefdom, like Maggie right now, they have to pay me $2. And so that is a kind of interactive attack that can happen when people draft these windmills. Then I'm going to get $2 for every windmill that I have in my tableau, which currently is only one, but later in the game, I'll be able to build up that engine and collect a lot of coins every time I place a tile down. The other incredibly interactive element are the army or the attack and the defense tiles. So when someone places one of these military attack tiles, anybody who has fewer castle defense than the number of attacks that this person is playing is going to have to again pay that person $2, but also one of their tiles gets destroyed. Their leftmost tile in their tableau gets put off to the side and is now no longer part of the fiefdom until they're able to play this housing or building type tile, which is going to resurrect that tile and put it back into their tableau. And the reason why that's important is because by the end of the game, you need to have at least one tile of each type, otherwise you lose 10 points. And the points in this game are collected throughout. So as you're collecting that money at the end of the game, it's going to be the person who has the most money that's going to win the game. And the main way you're going to collect money is through the synergy of the tiles that you're placing. There's 4 rounds to this game, and at the end of every round, there is an event that happens, which is public knowledge before you get started. So each game is going to have a variable setup of 4 different events that can either be positive. So for example, this one is giving every person 3 coins for every castle they have in their tableau, or it can be negative. So in this case, there's 2 types of tiles that are going to actually cost you money at the end of that round. So you can kind of plan ahead, and it does increase the competitiveness because everybody knows what's going to score, and so everyone's going to be trying to draft those particular types of tiles. The events were not part of the original game, and another thing that's been added is a way of really customizing your engine, and the way that you do that is through the church action when you lay a church tile, or a royal action when you lay the royalty or palace tile out, you're going to collect these little pieces that slot into the bottom of your player board. So you can choose where you place these, and one of them, the church, is going to give you an extra $1 of income when that part of your board is triggered. And then the other one, the royalty or the palace, is going to give you the option of choosing one of these symbols that you can add to the bottom of your player board, so that when this income triggers, it's doing so for more types of tiles. And the final thing that this version adds is every time you add a castle, you're going to get to place out this little flag. And this flag can go anywhere in future drafts in the rows. I've kind of destroyed this pattern now. But if we were all the way up here, I would be able to reserve a tile later on and nobody else can take this tile. And when I get to this part, I can choose whether I take that tile or not. So that's a nice way to ensure that you can build the engine you want to build in the future by taking those tower tiles. So that's a little bit about how this game works, but let's talk about the differences, and we'll start with the obvious ones.
Yeah, well, the first thing is in Majesty for the Realm, you're actually drafting cards with characters on them, as opposed to in here where you're drafting tiles that have more of like, not quite buildings, but almost like areas that are going to go into your fiefdom.
Yeah, and instead of drafting people in the, like you do in the original, now you're drafting more of an abstracted version of that area of your fiefdom. So instead of having a miller, for example, now we've just got this grain icon.
Farmland.
Yeah, which represents the farmland.
Yeah.
So it does have more of an abstract feel to it. The second thing is that in the original game, you are drafting those cards and you're just placing them underneath a board that represents those different areas. Here, we obviously have this super satisfying puzzle and all of the pieces just click in, and it is so satisfying.
It's actually really good because sometimes if you get it wrong, it won't fit. And I've had that. It was like, who's going to get it wrong? And then I was like, oh, actually, yeah, that goes over there. So that is really helpful.
It's a good little reminder, but without a doubt, the production quality of this player board has everybody talking from the first time they play it. Like every single person we've played this with has been like, wow, that's so nice how that all fits in together.
Even these pieces, that when you're customizing your board and you're getting to add these pieces, like the way they slot in is very, very satisfying. It's the same thing with, all of those little clipping ins.
Yeah, so that's a big difference to the card chaos. Of course, the way that the tiles are being drafted as compared to the cards is very different as well, because the way that the original works is you have one line of character cards, and it has that classic drafting mechanism that you can take the first person for free or the first card for free. But if you want one that's further back, you need to pay a meeple on each of the cards in order to access that card. And so it really relies on this economy of meeples, and you want to make sure that you continuously have meeples so that you can access more cards. That's very different to here, because here you have a lot of rows of tiles, you can see what's coming up, and then there's that turn order mechanism. So in the original game, the turn order is not changing, whereas here, depending on whether you place further left or further right, is going to dictate when you get to take it. And that can really matter, particularly in the defense and the attack things, because if I don't have time to build my defense before someone attacks before me, well, then I've miscalculated.
Yeah, and interestingly, obviously, the way it's been weighted is that as you're placing the tiles, they all have different numbers on the back, and you just have to put them in ascending order, which will usually mean that the weaker areas are going to end up on the left. So yes, you're going to be able to take that action first, but and be able to kind of then move your, like, pick your following row first. But it's usually going to be an area that doesn't have as many multipliers, because a lot of the areas kind of have, as you go higher and higher, they either give you more money or they're actually activating and giving you money for multiple areas, not just that one.
Now, as beautiful as this new player board is, you do lose a couple of things in the game because of it. So in the original, there were cards that were half-half, in that you could decide whether you wanted to place it as a witch, or in this case, as a defense or as a tower knight here. And so you could choose at the time the way that you place that. Because of this puzzle and because of the way that these fit neatly into one place or the other, obviously they can no longer do that. So that is removed from the game, which is a bit sad, because I like to have that flexibility and choice. Yeah, and it also meant that you didn't quite know what someone was going to do, because they draft and you're like, oh, are they going to attack me? you're like, no, I'm just placing it as a miller. And you're like,
miller.
oh, phew. It does lose that. The other thing that it doesn't have is on the back of the player board, there's nothing. And that, again, is probably due to the fact that the puzzle pieces wouldn't fit in if you flipped the board. But in the original, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, in the original, you created this sort of landscape with all the different areas, which have an A side and a B side. So it actually randomizes or changes the way that different areas score or give you coin.
And I do miss that because after we've played this so much, we played this at Gen Con, we've played it since Gen Con, we've played it at every player count, and the actions that happen here are always the same.
Yep.
And what we found when we play Majesty for the Realm is that, which is a really hard title, by the way. Middle Ages is definitely easier to remember, but Majesty for the Realm.
I also say Majesty, like just Majesty. Sure.
When you play it, what tends to happen is you finish the game and everyone's like, wow, that was really fun. And you might play the same side again, but then you can flip it over and it feels like a completely different game because of those actions. Now, in this game, they have added the event mechanic that at the end of every round, something's going to score, something's going to punish you. Yeah. But they're pretty basic.
They're not like a swingy sort of, this is going to make or break, your game. Or at least I haven't been able to optimize them to that point. No. It's just like, oh, you get a couple of coins or you lose a couple of coins. It's not,
Yeah, it's not game breaking. And they're all fairly similar. And they score in a similar way to the way that your engine scores. So I do wish that they had, made them a little bit more difficult. So maybe you needed to have pairs of 2 different types of tiles or something to give you more to aim for towards the end game, because at the moment they just seem like a nice bonus or a bit of a detriment, but nothing too exciting.
No. The other thing that I do actually really miss from Majesty for the Realm was the chips. They had these sort of really satisfying smaller version poker style chips, which were the currency or the coins, and now it's obviously been replaced with just cardboard tokens.
They had the Splendor chips.
It's a Splendor
chips.
Yeah, so
and
it's like,
who doesn't love those?
It's really nice.
But honestly, it is a really close call between those chips and this puzzle board, because everybody loves both elements. So either they're like, ooh, these chips are so nice, or ooh, this puzzle is so satisfying the way it all clicks together.
To bring the chips into this game.
Maybe that's the
it's
solution.
Just the currency. So
although if you've ever played Majesty for the Realm, you'll know that it desperately needed 5-point chips, and here they have included 5 points, and it works so much better than the 1s and 2s of the original game.
Now, in terms of which one feels more thematic, interestingly, the actual Majesty for the Realm, the fact that you're collecting characters and you have this really beautiful landscape of all the different areas where the characters are going to be sort of put underneath, it actually gives it quite a lot of charm and character. I mean, you actually have literal characters, but it also means that I actually paid more attention to the synergies between, of course, when you go to the brewery, everyone else who has a miller also benefits. Or when there's like the innkeeper, whenever you bring an innkeeper, then people who have a brewery also benefit. So I was like, oh yeah, of course. It sort of brought that sense of the town more to life. Whereas with this game, it just feels more streamlined, and at no point am I even like invested in like, oh, of course this would have a synergy with that one. It's just like, which icons are going to be a collection here, and which ones do I want to optimize?
And it's still really beautiful in its own way. I was really attracted to the artwork of this game, but I agree, it feels there's something more, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but there's something more sterile about its environment. It does feel like I'm relying on colors and icons, which, can make it easier for some people, but it does lose a little bit of the charm of the original, which, even though it's a bit chaotic and there's cards that are everywhere, there was something about it that had a lot of unique charm, and part of that was the feeling of the theme, which I do think is lost here. But if we talk about it mechanically, this is the more grown-up version of the game.
More sophisticated.
It is definitely more sophisticated. You can tell the changes that Marc-Andre has made and why. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those. The first thing is obviously the way that you draft tiles. So I'll just put this back together so we can look at this here in a random way.
They're probably incorrect.
They're probably incorrectly placed. But the way that you draft from this is really interesting, because firstly, the main difference is you can see ahead. And you can see what you're going to be drafting on each row. The number of tiles is always the number of players plus 1. And so I'm going to be evaluating what is it that I can take throughout the course of this entire round. And based on that, what do I want my turn order to be to have first choice of those parts, or to even place my flag out and reserve something in advance. Now, that is really different to the original game, because in the original game, there's just one row of cards that you're drafting from, and you have no idea what is coming. And so there is a stronger luck element, which I think feeds into the feeling of it being a bit more chaotic, but you have to be opportunistic when cards come out to grab them, and you're going to have to pivot your strategy. In this game, the fact that you can see ahead, the fact that you know what goals are going to score at the end of the round, it does feel like there's more strategy involved.
Yeah, there's a lot more, there's less hidden information. So you actually have a lot more information to go on as you're taking your turns, and you can be more strategic as opposed to just being reactive. And,
when the tiles come out, for example, if all of the later tiles in the round are a lot of attack tiles, you know you're probably going to get attacked, and are you going to be the person who wants to deal that attack, or are you going to try and prepare yourself by therefore taking the towers that come up? You don't have that level of foresight in the original game. The other thing that they've done is they have, I would say, fixed the scoring at the end of the game to make it a little bit less punishing in terms of what happens when you're missing a tile or a card in a particular area. In the original game, the way they punish you is you basically square the number of areas that you have covered off on your board. So for example, if you had 6, you would get 6 times 6, 36 points. But then you can see that if you had 7, you would have got 7 times 7, 49. So you are getting quite a lot more points for having just that one extra card. In the new game, if I was missing an area on my board, you simply detract 10 points for each of those areas. So it's much cleaner, and it feels less swingy in that way.
Yeah. I actually didn't mind that much, that swinginess, because I'm the type of player that likes to diversify. So it was kind of interesting when it's like, haha, if someone just went really, really intense on just like 1 or 2, then I felt like then I could catch up a bit at that point. But it's, you know, that's sort of like one point, not that big of a deal. The other thing is both games can be quite fiddly in terms of their admin. There's a lot of cleanup, because every time, obviously, you know, with Middle Ages, every time someone takes a tile, there's usually a tile that has to be removed, and then that line has to be replaced. And so you usually want to allocate one person, one or two
to
people
do the refilling of the market.
Yeah, because that's happening every single round, like every single turn. And with Majesty for the Realm, it was the same with the cards, because you're having to do is the conveyor belt type thing, where then you're having to move all the cards that are there, reveal a new one, move all the cards. And so they both, I would say neither of them wins out as the less admin fiddly in between turns.
Yeah, and the thing is with this game, the turns are really fast, but sometimes they move too fast. And occasionally in both games, I've had to slow down the players, particularly when there's new players, because what happens is everyone's focused on grabbing the tile or grabbing the card that they want and activating it. And really, it helps if you slow down and the person can say, okay, so now I get 4 coins for this, and this happens, and now I'm going to attack everyone. Because what you don't want to happen is for you to miss something that is an interaction point between players when everyone's so focused on their puzzle. But yeah, the admin is a little annoying in these games, but it's basically equally annoying in both games. I will say though that does have an impact on my preferences for player count. So both games are totally fine from 2. Now Middle Ages plays up to 5, whereas the original only plays up to 4. So that's a bonus, because the game is pretty snappy. So you can play it at 5. But the amount of admin is probably, a bit restrictive in terms of getting this game out at a 2-player count, because Maggie and I are really fast players. And so what ends up happening is it feels like we spend as much time doing admin as we do playing out the game.
If not more, because it's like the turn's really quick, and then it's like, okay, shuffle and like get rid of the things and put the new one. And it's like, oh, you're already taking your turn. So it feels like you end up doing like 70% admin to 30% actual turn.
Exactly. But also, the more players you have, the more interaction there is, and the more you're interacting in different ways with different people. So from that sense, it's probably more fun to have more players in this game. So ultimately, which of these games is for you? This is a really hard one, because there are, as we've talked through, there's positives and negatives about both, but both of them are actually really fantastic games, and to the point where I think you could almost have both in your collection because they do feel very different. And it's weird because it has the same DNA, but the draft is so different that it does make it feel like a different game. The original feels a bit more chaotic, but it also has more charm and it has more luck of the draw, which gives it that feeling of chaos, and the swingy points at the end. It makes it feel like this wacky game, whereas this one is definitely a much more refined version of the game. The puzzle and the way it comes together, super satisfying, beautiful table presence, and a more interesting draft that allows you to be more strategic. Which is your preferred?
Well, it's interesting because I just can't go past the, like, again, it's the same. I agree with you. Every single point that you've just said, it's like, what mood are you in? Do you want to have a very more tempered and just like even strategic playing experience, or are you in for like something that has a bit like of charm and quirk and character personality and a bit of swinginess sometimes and a bit of like and if for some reason that one Majesty feels meaner at times,
it does feel
even
meaner.
though they both have the same mechanic.
Maybe because there's an infirmary and you're actually killing each other, and you need a witch to bring yourself back to life. But it's that kind of quirk and charm.
Here's more abstracted in that, an area is now destroyed, and then it's like when you bring in the repair that it can. So maybe that's it. But
ultimately, one is out of print and one has just become widely available.
Correct.
So for that reason, if you've never played Majesty, then Middle Ages is a great way to get into this game, and it does fix some things that probably annoyed a few people about the original. So definitely encourage you to try this game. It has a really fun engine building mechanic that is interactive enough to satisfy the fact that it's not multiplayer solitaire, but it never feels like super mean or super aggressive. It's just a really lovely mid-weight game. So we recommend you try it out. We have done our rankings in the past for Majesty for the Realm. Mine was 7.5. I think it still stacks up at 7.5. And I'm going to give this a 7.5 because I honestly can't choose between either, and I would like to have both in my collection.
There you go. Well, I had given Majesty an 8, and I have to say I do prefer the quirk and charmingness, the charm and the sort of the thematic feel of that one better. So this is a close second. So I'm gonna give this a 7.9. So they're close. Very, very close, but I still will opt for the more chaotic, just like
which is weird because you get kind of mean in the original.
I know.
Just very intense and like I'm gonna take you down, which is very unlike Maggie. But anyway, that is our review kind of both games and a bit of a comparison. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.